Welcome everybody to the
Hi.
Upside of Bipolar. I am so excited to have my guest tonight, Dr. Giordano. Dr. Jennifer Giordano is a holistic psychiatrist. She works with Free Range Psychiatry, and I'm really excited to have you on. Thank you so much for joining.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. I'm overjoyed to be here. And yes, I'm so sorry for my technological challenges, but thank you for your patience.
Yeah,
And yeah, super happy to be here and have this conversation.
absolutely. So why don't we start with you introducing yourself? Why don't you let everybody know who you are?
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Jennifer Giordano. I'm a physician here in the US. I am a psychiatrist. I work for Free Range Psychiatry as a holistic psychiatrist. And what I would say, what that means is that we take a genuinely holistic approach to well-being. And we look at mental health, but not only mental health, but also your physical health, because the two are impossible, I feel like, to extract from each other. I think in the traditional system, we try to create some kind of artificial divide between the two. But we really are genuinely, authentically holistic in our approach and our care, and that we've really put a person's whole life on the table and look at it and discuss it with them to really try to determine and assess what's going on that is contributing to whatever symptoms they're experiencing. So we will look at a person multidimensionally, because as human beings, we are complex creatures. So we are not simple beings, and we really take the time. And Dr. Campbell, who founded this practice, really set it up in such a way that we would be able to have the time to really be with people, really look at all of the different aspects that go into well-being, and then address them. So that's my current role. Before that, I had worked in the traditional Western mental health care system. I went through a traditional residency program in medical school. I was one that always tended toward or was interested in holistic health in general. And then I was also one who found the traditional system a bit painful to work inside of, to be honest, in that I could feel the fact that we were addressing things oftentimes extremely superficially, and to the current model, and seeing people every 15 minutes, 4 people an hour, and giving them substances that are mind altering. I mean, they are altering your brain chemistry, and to do that in what felt like a very mechanistic, almost assembly line kind of feeling, for me was just soul depleting. It just did not align with how I feel as a human. So over the years, I've tried to incorporate what I can into the approach to mental health from the holistic standpoint. But I would say with Free Range over the last 2.5 years, that has just amplified humongously there, because I'm actually working within a construct that allows that to happen in a truly deeply integrated way.
Absolutely.
So there's a long explanation.
No, that's fantastic, because I think it's really important to understand one of the things that was very frustrating for me when I was early in my diagnosis. For the first about 12 years after my diagnosis, I tried the traditional approach to treating my bipolar, because that was all I knew. That was the only path that I knew to take. And I trusted my doctors, at least for the first 10 years. And then when I had my breakdown, I started losing faith in my doctors, because I thought, I'm not getting better, I'm getting worse. And I'm not seeing a path forward. I'm not seeing any kind of light at the end of the tunnel. In fact, it just felt like things were getting darker and darker and darker. And one of the things that was very frustrating for me was the fact that the person who was prescribing my medication would see me. I saw them once for an hour at the beginning when they would, give me the diagnosis. And then I didn't see them again for maybe 3 months. And I would see them for 15 minutes for a med check. And then I wouldn't see them for another 3 or 4 months. And then I'd see them for 15 minutes for a med check. if I was having issues, I would call the hospital, or call the doctor's office, and I might get, the nurse giving me information about, no, just stay on your medication, or, make this tweak or whatever. But I kept thinking, like, how, at the beginning, that seemed to make sense. But then the further on I got, I started thinking, how do you know, like, they expected you to remember all this information from 3 months when you went in to see them, and then they were giving you, like you were saying, like these mind-altering medications. And the one person who did see me all the time, my therapist, didn't have any power to prescribe any kind of medication or any kind of, therapeutic treatment of any kind. And they didn't talk to each other. It just felt like there was massive disconnect in the treatment model. And I think I talked to you about this before. I'm hypersensitive. Like, I'm very sensitive to how my body's feeling and that kind of thing. And when I had my babies, my first 2 children, I was on medication, and I had to go back on, the really big, like, mood stabilizers and that a few months after I had my babies, and I had a hyperthyroid condition that resulted. And I was sure that it was related to my medication, but when I would talk to the doctors, they're like, oh, no. And they would treat them, they would focus on the hyperthyroidism to the exclusion of everything else that was going on in my body and my brain. And I was sure, I kept thinking, I'm sure that these are connected to each other, because they were all feeling like they were connected to each other, but nobody would listen to me. And I started thinking, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, And it's really easy to manipulate people with mental health disorders, because we feel like we're crazy anyway, and we're trusting the doctors to tell us what to do. So let me ask you this. When did you make the transition? How did you make the transition? Were you always, I think you said, you kind of always had that desire, but were you already trying to treat this holistically in your practice before, or did you transition only when you started working with Dr. Campbell?
I would say before I even left residency, I was already trying to figure out, like, how can I do this differently? I knew the traditional system was not for me, for that very reason that you kind of described. I knew that approach was not in alignment with just how I felt intuitively. And before that, what I'll say is just kind of back it up. Like, I had anxiety myself, crippling, in my early 20s. That was when my mental health, well, I'm sure my mental health journey started well before that, but I had my first panic attack in chemistry class in college, and ended up in the ER a couple of times for panic attacks. So even before I had gone to medical school, I was interacting with the mental health care system, and it was not helping me. It's sure as heck was not getting to the root of things. And at best, I was given Xanax at one point, I was given Prozac at one point, and I know how those made me feel. I thought Prozac made me feel like I was going to die.
Yeah.
I would have gladly suffered those panic attacks versus feel what I ended up feeling on Prozac, and then the Xanax just made me feel weird. But anyway, so and there it probably sparked some of my journey about wanting to find ways to feel better. And I happen to just be inclined to kind of natural stuff. I went through years and years and a gajillion million supplements. And then it was looking at diet, and then it was meditation, and then it was, just, that was my natural kind of orientation to things in the first place. And then I got through college and then went to medical school. And I had hoped that I could integrate that natural way of approaching stuff into how I practiced as a physician. And then I went through the system of education and realized, like, dang, that ain't possible. It's because there's literally no time, even just with the amount of time you can spend with a person in the traditional system. There's just no time. So then I graduated and started my own practice, but it was kind of on a lower scale. It was on I didn't have kind of the amount of patients that I do now. I think just probably because I was feeling a little more tentative. I was out on my own, and I was involved in my spouse's business at that time, and that was taking up also a lot of my time. So I didn't go like really dive into this, to this level and in this stage or state of things until the last several years. Prior to that, also, I had I had taken a bit of a sabbatical and became a yoga and meditation teacher
Oh,
for a
yeah.
couple of years. So I went to India for that. And I think too, what I just see that as is a natural expression of truly more desire for natural well-being, ultimate well-being and health. And so, but then COVID hit and life changed, and I came back to psychiatry and happened to find Dr. Campbell in this practice. And then she's got a fellowship program. She's kind of pioneered a bunch of this stuff. She's a renegade. She's like a trailblazer. I'm a nervous, I'm a more nervous constitution. So if someone else has blazed the trail, she just has gung ho. And I just have loved everything I've learned from her since the moment I've met her. She's got a fellowship program. I've done it. Which is huge amounts of education and orientation about what's really going on with mental health. And that was where I really sunk deeply into it. And now I would say, my role is working with people like, hardcore in this, and people who want to really take their well-being into their own hands. And I think that's a piece of it, piece of true healing, true, true, genuine, like to your bones kind of healing is when there's that shift in a person, when they start to realize, like, wait a minute, I'm it. As in, I'm the source of my healing and well-being, and I have to drive the train, drive this journey, versus looking for outside inputs to tell me, what's right and wrong for me, or what I need to do or not do. And while it's helpful, good to take information from others, who may be able to offer it. But what I see is when people kind of have this inner shift of like, whoa, wait a minute, I'm ready to drive the train of my healing and well-being journey. It's like a game changer. And when they start kind of questioning, like, wait a minute, is this helping me? What do I intuitively feel like I need and want? And then it's just so fun. It's so fun to listen to someone else's intuition about what they feel is right for them, about what they've learned about their own system, because I feel every person is you are the expert in you. Nobody else knows you better than you ever. It's not possible. And so I love the opportunity to hear other people's observation and understanding of themselves, because that's where our true roadmap's going to come from. I can give you all kinds of resources, all kinds of information, links, but it's not my journey. It has to resonate with and be authentic and genuine to you. And I would say that's kind of the antithesis, or the 180-degree difference from the traditional system, where it's very paternalistic. It's very dogmatic. You will do this. Do not stray from this. In fact, I don't want to hear too much about the other stuff. Just do this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was so traumatic for me in my first hospitalization. That was the longest hospitalization. And that one, I had severe trauma from that. In fact, it was just this last, like a few months ago, that I finally, like, that trauma resurfaced, and I recognized I actually needed to do some trauma healing from it. But I had a psychiatrist in that hospitalization that was insisting that I take a medication that I knew was dangerous for me. I had had a psychotic episode on the medication when I very first started taking it years before, and I was terrified of taking this medication. But she absolutely insisted that I needed to take this medication and would not release me from the hospital unless I agreed to do it. And I was like crying, begging her not to make me do it. And she was telling me, this is what you need, and I know what you need. And so I agreed, and because I wanted to go home. I'd been in the hospital at that point, 5 weeks out of a 6-week period. I missed my family. I had 2 little children at the time, and I just wanted to go home. And so I agreed to take the medication, and I got suicidal and attempted suicide on it. And it was one of those situations where one of the hard things about this disorder, having bipolar disorder, is it's really hard to trust your own mind. And it's very easy to feel like the doctor knows best, the doctor knows what I need. And so you feel like you have to listen to the doctor is going to tell you what to do. And when I first, I didn't realize what a unique situation it was that my doctor actually agreed to look at the micronutrient treatment that I brought to him, because I was desperate at that point. I'd been on medication for 12 years and I was so desperate for something, some kind of hope, but I wasn't willing to try it unless he agreed that it was safe to try. And at that point, he'd been treating me for 8 years. And I really believed that he wanted to help me, but he didn't know what else to do. Mm-hmm. And so he agreed and looked at the studies that had been done on it and felt like maybe this is a viable option. And so he gave the okay. And I worked with the company to titrate off my medications and onto the supplements. And one of the things that was really hard about that was the withdrawal symptoms. That was the scariest part of the whole thing for me, was because the withdrawal symptoms manifest like the symptoms of the bipolar. And so it's really scary because you think, oh my gosh, I'm starting to cycle. This isn't working. And the company kept saying, this is withdrawal symptoms. What you're experiencing right now are withdrawals. And so they would help me with other things that would help kind of, mitigate those symptoms. And I'm so thankful that I stuck it out, because 3 months in, I finally started to feel like my brain was waking up. I started to feel like my brain was normal, starting to feel normal again. But it took like 10 years to completely heal from the effects of the medication, to completely heal my brain, to figure out exactly what nutrients my body needed. And during that time, like you were saying, I was kind of having to figure out my own map back to wellness, like to living healthy. And it's a little unsettling to be going against the grain, to be swimming upstream and doing what other people don't, everybody else is doing what the doctors are telling them. And you're like, that's not working for me. I'm going to try something different. And it feels unsettling and a little uncomfortable, but I am so grateful that I did it. And I wanted to ask you, I follow Dr. Campbell all the time, and I love her content. One of the things she talks about is, how long it takes to titrate off of medications, how long, that you shouldn't just go cold turkey, because you can end up with severe problems from it. Do you have, like a protocol for that? Or how do you help people that are wanting to get off medications and get onto a safer treatment that's actually going to heal them rather than just treat the symptoms? Like, what's the protocol for that? How do you approach that?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I'll just speak to this whole idea, this concept of withdrawal. Withdrawal from any psychiatric medication is something that is, except for the benzodiazepines, traditionally not acknowledged in the traditional Western community. Your traditional doctor will not acknowledge withdrawal from SSRIs, antipsychotics. And so I would say we've done the research through the peer-based online support communities. There's so much incredible information now out there, and now from some of the more kind of like the other renegade psychiatrists out there. We've gone down those rabbit holes to learn and understand more about what's the truth, what's the reality of psychiatric medications. And the reality is, any psych med that you're taking on a daily basis or very regularly, your body develops a physiological dependence on it. Period. End of story. And so withdrawal, so if you're told to stop, you've been taking, say, for example, if you've been taking Prozac for 2 years, and at a certain point you're like, maybe I don't need this anymore, I'm feeling good, my circumstances change, I've learned, I've grown, I'm taking care of my health, and your doctor might tell you, okay, well, just cut that in half for a few weeks and then stop. Worst thing they'll tell you is cold turkey. Disastrous. Second worst thing they'll tell you, cut it in half for a couple weeks and stop. Or cut it in half for a couple weeks and then half again for a couple weeks and then stop. I've seen, I don't know how many people now, countless people go through torture, what they'll use the words torturous, horrendous, worst experience of my life, withdrawal symptoms. And you are 100% right that the withdrawal symptoms mimic the original illness or distress. It mimics that. So then the person is then immediately told, oh, look, see, you were sick. go back on the medication. And so people, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands or millions of people are stuck on meds in a merry-go-round for this very thing, because this whole phenomenon of withdrawal is just like, to me, I've been out of it long enough in this kind of realm so long, it's surreal to me.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely surreal that that's not acknowledged. So what I would say is, your question about what's our protocol, it's the holistic approach. So we are going to gear a person up with all of the good, nourishing stuff that they need in their system. So biologically, like physiologically, supplements, diet, exercise. Mentally, we're going to therapy, because there was an original distress. There was something, originally something happened where there was an original distress that needs to be addressed. So therapy, and then holistic relaxation practices and all that kind of stuff to prep a person to then be able to taper their medications. And then our tapering protocol is, we don't have a set protocol, kind of going with this thing of every person's body is different. But I'll give you an example, like, of our approach for somebody is, so in the traditional system, it's, cut it in half for 2 weeks and stop. What we'll say is, okay, you're on your original dose of medication. More of a ballpark for us would be, let's do a 15% reduction and then wait at least 1 month, 1 to 3 months, we'll have that person at that dose. That's ballpark, okay? Everybody comes in at a different dosing levels of their meds, what they've been through before, what they're going through now. I mean, I've got a person reducing at 0.02% of a medication. I've got, sometimes it's 10%, or sometimes it's 5%, or 16.7%. But what we're doing, and what we do with each person and each reduction, is we sit down and we go through the whole thing of what's going on, which medication, how much, what's your intuition about it. I'll tell you my input, my information. And then we always, at that point, basically come to like a dose that we feel like, yeah, okay, that's about right. So we do a reduction, and then we watch their reduction, we watch their withdrawal pattern. We start to try to learn their withdrawal pattern. So that first reduction, keep an eye on it, what's going on, what week did you experience, what symptoms, and all that kind of stuff. Then we reconvene and assess, okay, what happened, what did you think, what is your thought? And the idea being is that we turn withdrawal symptoms into nuisance level rather than intolerable or horrific level.
Yeah.
We're trying to bring them to a point where a person can live their life, do their daily thing, make it, but still be, progressing toward their goal of the reduced dose. So it's the no protocol. I mean, it has an essence, like a framework like that, and I review it with every person. I go through, here's the whole thing. You taper one medication at a time. Our ballpark percentages and timings. But it's not always right. Like I just got somebody who, she found her Prozac reduction sweet spot is every 7 weeks, and now it's like clockwork. Yeah. We do 10% every 7 weeks, and it's like boo. And I'm watching her face brighten every time I see her. Like the next appointment, next appointment, next. I'm like, oh my gosh. So it's really, really cool to see people reclaim their true position in their whole healing journey, that to truly claim their power in their life's journey. It's super fun. So
well, and do you ever have, my experience was that I started feeling over medicated as I started taking on the micronutrients and my brain started to heal. I started feeling over medicated, and I would tell, and that was one of the reasons why I was so thankful that my doctor and the customer support of the company that provided the treatment were letting me run the show. And it sounds like it's the same kind of thing, because I would call and say, I don't feel good. I can feel the medication in my system. And they say, okay, it's time to titrate down. And they used amino acids to help with the transition. And it was, but I could feel it. Like I would get to a point like I can feel the medication in my system. And so sometimes I was going down more quickly. It wasn't quick, but it was more quickly than what they were originally, suggesting, because I could feel the medication in my body and in my mind. Like you can feel it. Like when you don't, it's really funny because my experience with my first time titrating off of something was Zoloft. I had been on it for 3.5 years, and that was my first antidepressant. And I didn't know at the beginning, like I was in college when I got diagnosed. And so I was pretty young and inexperienced, and I happened to move to a different state. And so I started with a new psychiatrist. And when she was, in my intake, I was telling her how I was tired all the time. Like I could sleep, no matter how much sleep I got at night, I could fall asleep anywhere. I was constantly exhausted. And when I mentioned that to her, she said, "Oh, well, let's just switch your medication." I thought, "Oh, you can do that?" Like the other psychiatrists hadn't even talked to me about those things. When I titrated off that medication, I was passing out in the street in Chicago, like walking down the street, passing out. I was dizzy constantly. Like it was the most horrible. I was terrified. I was terrified of walking around. I was afraid I was going to pass out in my boss's office. And it went on for weeks. The withdrawals were so protracted. And the doctor was just like, "This is normal. Don't worry, it'll pass." But it was horrible. Like I had nothing that I could do about it. I just had to wait it out, And the other thing that was really hard was liver function tests. Every time, with the mood stabilizers that I was on, at one point I was on 7 different medications. Every time I would have a problem, they would just add a medication. And I didn't tolerate that medication very well. So I was never on a therapeutic dosage of anything. So they just kept adding medication on top of medication on top of medication. And then I was having to go in for liver function tests. And I remember one time going in for that test thinking, I'm dying. Like I'm taking medication that is killing me right now. And I'm still struggling with the symptoms of this disorder. Like I don't understand what the point of all of this is, because I was still sick with my bipolar and I was killing my liver at the same time. Like it just all felt really futile. And it was so hard to not have any other options. It was so frustrating to feel like, and at the time when I first was diagnosed, I was told by one of my doctors, this is like having diabetes. And I believed him. I believed that the medications that they were giving me were kind of like insulin, that my brain needed it and they just had to figure out the right one. But I started thinking, I told my uncle one time, who was a biomedical engineer, I said, "I feel like they're playing guess and check with my brain." And guess and check is what they teach you in high school biology, is like the worst approach to science ever. You don't play guess and check. You figure things out, and then, through the scientific method, and then you identify your solution. And we weren't doing that. We were just throwing medications at me, left and right, trying to figure it out. And I was suffering the whole time. And so that's one of the reasons, like, I wish that I could have found a doctor like you, because I was very holistic in everything else that I did in my life. I was learning how to do yoga, and now I understand like why yoga is so important. Yoga is an absolutely indispensable part of my self-care routine every single day. And, mindfulness meditation is crucial, because when you have a mental illness for a long time, you start to lose, like, you don't feel like you're friends with your mind anymore. And I would like intentionally cause myself to daydream. I would not stay in my own mind because it was such an uncomfortable place to be. And then I kind of lost that started anxiety problems for me, because I was, intentionally going outside of my mind and losing control of my brain. So there's all these different pieces that are necessary if you want to become mentally well. It's not just, and I think that's part of the problem in our society, is we want a quick fix. We want some kind of a Band-Aid that's going to just fix the problem so we can just move on with our lives. But fixing a mental illness is you have to figure out what's causing it in the first place. What is causing the symptoms? Stop trying to treat the symptoms, because it's not actually treating the disorder, and figure out what's causing the symptoms in the first place. If you can treat the root cause of it, then the symptoms go away. So, yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
this is something I'm very passionate about.
Yeah. No, all of it. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think to me, it's strange and interesting to see how again, the system, right? The system has it's grown and developed the way that it has. What can be mind-boggling is within that system how little humility we have to acknowledge that we don't really know what the heck's going on with the medications, with the brain. Okay, we can see, okay, like you said, like the guess and check. Okay, I give this person this chemical, I see this result in their their subjective experience and their behavior. That's, I mean, they debunked the serotonin theory, the theory of depression. That whole thing of, oh, you have a chemical imbalance, that's the cause of your depression. Well, that huge study came out showing, like, no, we didn't. We don't know that that's the cause. And so, and if you read about actually the historical establishing of psychiatry in its current practice, if you look through the history of it and then see the forces that shaped it and some of the tenets of the social situations at that time, it helps you understand why we're doing, like, why is this happening? Why, how are we possibly doing this to each other as human beings? It's a system, to me, that has just, where's the humility? Where's the listening? Where's the humanitarian piece? Where's the humanness piece? And the acknowledgement of being a human being is an extraordinarily complex thing. If it was simplistic, we'd have this figured out, done, we wouldn't even be talking. It's not a simple thing, being human. It's not even close. And so having that humility to acknowledge that and to be willing to be an explorer. I am learning every day. We're talking learning like on the roller coaster, like, that kind of learning every day, okay? Because I went through 5 years of residency training, 4 years of medical school. I was an engineer before that. It's like a lot of training, a lot of academics, a lot of all that stuff. But the reality, as when it comes to human well-being, human health, we are still learning a whole lot. We know extraordinarily little compared to what we don't know. So to me, I'm always wondering, like, why don't people want to be open to learn and listen to people who are actually experiencing these things themselves? Yeah. Which is an interesting thing about the advent of the internet. Now there is a ton of information and voices out there saying the real, right? People's anecdotal experiences, like, this is my experience with Zoloft, and this is what happened, and this is what's happening, and that's data. Yeah. Yeah. And not through the traditional system won't recognize it as such, but that's data. Maybe the AI, with the advent of AI, and they start, grooming the internet for all this information, they'll consider it data, but that's data. So it's interesting, and we'll see how this whole, like, what's going on in the internet, how that shapes, if and or how it'll shape kind of the evolution of our treatment of mental well-being.
Yeah, and I think one of the things the thing that you mentioned about the humility piece is, it's been very frustrating to have people dismiss my experience. When I talk about my experience, I was very sick. I was very, very sick. I was like, when it took a couple of years for me to actually get diagnosed, because my family didn't realize what was going on. I was away at college, and I would, get very hypomanic and make huge life-changing decisions. And then I would get severely depressed and disappear for weeks. And then I would get manic again. And it took some time for people, because I kind of had that same pattern growing up. Everybody just thought I was a really emotional person. But when it really became severe when I was in college, it took about 2 years before we recognized, and I almost had a breakdown at that point. And then when I was actively trying to treat it for 12 years, I just kept getting worse. I was getting sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. And then I had my breakdown in 2008. And so I had psychotic episodes. Like, I was very sick. And over the past, I guess it's been about 13 years now, I gradually learned all the pieces that I needed to live well. And I don't cycle anymore. I do not experience mood cycles anymore. I still would say I have bipolar disorder, because I think if I stop taking the micronutrient treatment, if I stop doing all the self-care, I would probably start not feeling very well, mentally. But that's the same thing. Like if you stop eating, if you stop taking care of yourself physically, you get sick. And I just happen to have a predisposition to this illness. And so, but when I try to share my experiences, I have people that say, oh, well, you probably didn't really have bipolar disorder, or they'll dismiss my experience because it's not fitting in the traditional path. I'm not doing the traditional treatment anymore. It did not work for me, and I do not like it. And I encourage people to think outside the box with their healing, because now I know it's a lie to say that you can't heal from bipolar disorder. That's a lie. It's not true. You just have to figure out what's causing the symptoms. We are creating a diagnosis based on symptoms. It's just not like, I did a post about it, that this is not diabetes. Diabetes has a very clear, measurable cause that then you treat with a very clear, treatment. And this is not the same thing. We are not, this is not diagnosed based on a root cause. It's diagnosed just based on symptoms, and everybody's symptoms are different. We can talk to 5 people that all have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and all of our experiences will be different from each other. So how are we deciding this is a medical diagnosis solely based on the symptoms, and then only treating the symptoms? That's one of the things that's so frustrating for me, is that people are not actually healing, and they're not being told that they can heal. They're just being treated. And then people just suffer for the rest of their lives with this, and you end up with all these extra diagnoses. That's the other thing that's frustrating, is that the medications start to break your body and your brain, and then you end up with all these other issues on top of it.
Yeah, well, that's a common thing, is you start off with one medication, and then it's having side effects, so here's this one, and then this one. And I mean, if a person is on multiple psych meds, from multiple different classes of, you can be quite suspicious that something like this is going on. It's trying to treat the symptoms, and then the side effects, and then the symptoms, and you're right, it doesn't address the root. It's at best symptom abatement.
Yeah
Absolutely.
So I could talk to you all night, but I want to be respectful of your time, because I know that you're busy. So if there's one thing that you would recommend for people that are struggling, that are looking for help, what would you recommend to them? What would you say to them if they are trying to find help, if they're trying to find solutions? What would you say?
It is possible to feel better. It's possible. It is really, just don't give up. I know it can feel dark, and it can feel scary, and it can be an extraordinarily lonely journey. But there's lots of cool things popping up now. Like, you're out here right now doing a live, and your voice, these voices are coming forward. So I like to tell people, especially when they just kind of get in touch with us, in the first place, I just say, yeah, nope, you're not crazy. You're having a normal human response to these conditions that are going on, that we do and don't understand. And, we're going to do our best to get at it, and to get to the root of things, and to give you your best shot at being able to be well, and be healthy, and be happy, and enjoy a fulfilling life. I will just say, it's possible, people. And yeah, don't give up.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. If you are not following Dr. Giordano, make sure you follow her. It's Dr. Jennifer Giordano. And also make sure you follow Free Range Psychiatry. There's amazing information on there. Dr. Campbell shares really amazing. I mean, I love all of her videos. I'm always like commenting on them and always sharing them, because I love what she shares. She's so fearless in sharing this information. And it's given me courage to be more courageous, because it's a little bit challenging sometimes to be willing to speak out, because a lot of times people want to swat you back down, and there's always this fear of what if somebody misunderstands, or but we have to speak up, because people have to know that there's a better way to live. So
yeah, it's a huge pay it forward. And I see this for a lot of people. They kind of reach their, as they're going into big healing phases, there's a natural thing that wells up, in some way, somehow, I have to pay it forward. I see it a lot. So yes, thank you for paying it forward, and all y'all out there who are paying it forward. And yeah, I mean, through that, it really, I mean, I think it saves lives.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. See you
Happy,
next
happy
Thursday.
to be here. All
Have a
right.
great
Take
evening.
care.
Okay.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.